What if the most famous assassination in history was a catastrophic failure? What if the senators who stabbed Julius Caesar on the Ides of March, thinking they were saving their republic, actually signed its death warrant? This isn't just the story of a great general or a politician. This is the story of how one man's life, and especially his death, accidentally shattered a 500-year-old government and forged a mighty empire in its place. This is the untold story of how Julius Caesar's ambition created a blueprint for the modern world, a design he never, ever lived to see. The Tinderbox, a republic in decay. To get the man, you have to get the world that made him. The Rome of Caesar's youth wasn't the glorious marble-clad city you're picturing. It was a tinderbox of corruption, inequality, and straight-up street violence. The Roman Republic, once a shining example of shared government, was rotting from the inside out. For a century, it had been crippled by political gridlock, with aristocratic factions fighting for scraps of power while the city's poor starved. Rome had already seen a preview of what happens when ambition meets opportunity. Generals like Gaius Marius, Caesar's uncle by marriage, and his rival Sulla had marched their own armies on the city, kicking off terrifying purges called proscriptions. They'd post lists of their political enemies, offering cash for their heads. It was a time of pure terror, where being rich could get you killed and loyalty was for sale. This was the world that taught young Gaius Julius Caesar one crucial lesson. In Rome, power is everything. To be without it is to be a victim. And Caesar decided he would never be a victim again. Born into the prestigious but not super-rich Julian clan, Caesar claimed he was descended from the goddess Venus herself. This wasn't just ego, it was a political power move, a declaration of his own destiny. And his audacity was legendary. In one famous, almost unbelievable story, a young Caesar was kidnapped by pirates. When they demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, he laughed in their faces, insulted they'd ask for so little. He insisted they were undervaluing him and told them to ask for 50. For over a month he lived among them not as a prisoner, but like their commander. He'd shush them when they were being too loud, write speeches he'd force them to listen to, and all the while cheerfully promised that the moment he was free, he would hunt them all down and crucify them. The pirates just laughed. Big mistake. As soon as the ransom was paid, Caesar raised a fleet, tracked them down, and did exactly what he said he would. It was a chilling preview of the man he'd become. Charming, charismatic, but backed by an iron will and a terrifying capacity for ruthless calculation. This was the man about to step into the broken arena of Roman politics, ready not just to play the game, but to win it all. The path to power. In Rome, nobody could rule alone. Power was a game of backroom deals. Caesar, with his divine bloodline but empty wallet, needed partners. He found them in two of Rome's most powerful figures, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, its richest man. Together they formed an unofficial but incredibly powerful alliance we now call the First Triumvirate. This wasn't a friendship, it was a pact to steamroll the Senate and dominate Roman politics. Crassus brought the money, Pompey brought the military clout, and Caesar brought the political genius and popular touch. They completely bypassed the authority of the conservative senators, the Optimates, who hated all three of them. But for Caesar, this was just a stepping stone. After his term as consul, he landed himself the governorship of Gaul, a huge territory covering modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland. This was his shot at getting the two things he desperately needed: a massive fortune and military glory to rival Pompey's. For the next 8 years, Caesar waged the Gallic Wars. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a masterclass in PR. As his legions conquered tribe after tribe, Caesar did something brilliant. He wrote his own version of the events, the commentaries on the Gallic War, and sent them back to Rome to be read aloud to the public. They were written in a direct, simple style that seemed objective, but they were pure, carefully crafted propaganda. He painted himself as a military genius and the heroic protector of Rome, saving civilization from savage barbarians. He turned himself into a living legend. The Gallic Wars were brutal, but they were a staggering success. They pushed Rome's borders to the English Channel and the Rhine and brought immense wealth back to the city, and even more into Caesar's personal bank account. More importantly, the wars forged an army loyal to one man. Caesar's legions, especially the legendary 13th, were battle-hardened veterans. He shared their hardships, he knew their names, and he paid them well. Their loyalty wasn't to the Senate or to Rome, it was to him. By the time Gaul was conquered, Caesar had a fortune, a fearsome reputation, and a fanatically loyal private army. The tinderbox of Rome was about to meet its flame. The die is cast. While Caesar was becoming a legend in Gaul, things in Rome were falling apart. The triumvirate, the alliance that had given him his start, was dead. Crassus, seeking his own military glory, had been killed fighting in the east. And Pompey, once Caesar's ally, now watched his rival's fame and power grow with increasing fear. He switched sides, joining Caesar's old enemies in the Senate. The partnership was over. A showdown was inevitable. The Senate, now with Pompey's muscle behind them, gave Caesar an ultimatum: disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew exactly what that meant. Without his command and the legal immunity that came with it, his enemies would prosecute him, destroy his career, and probably take his life. He was trapped. To obey meant political suicide. To disobey meant treason. In January of 49 BCE, Caesar led a single legion, his loyal 13th, to a small river that marked the border between his province and Italy, the Rubicon. Roman law was crystal clear. Any general who crossed the Rubicon with an army was an enemy of the state. This was the point of no return. The historian Suetonius tells us Caesar paused on the riverbank, fully aware of what he was about to do. Then he made his choice. Alea iacta est, he declared. The die is cast. He crossed the river, plunging the Roman world into civil war. This wasn't just a march, it was a revolution. It was a declaration that one man, with the backing of his army, could defy the entire constitutional order of the Republic. The old system was about to be tested by one man's will to survive, and it would shatter. The dictator and his vision Caesar's march on Rome was shockingly fast. Panicked, Pompey and the Senate fled to Greece to regroup, abandoning the capital. Caesar had taken Italy without a real fight. The civil war that followed raged across the Mediterranean, but Caesar's military genius was undeniable. He crushed Pompey's larger army in Greece, and Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was promptly assassinated by the young pharaoh's court, hoping to get on the winner's good side. With his enemies gone, Caesar returned to Rome not just as a general, but as the master of the Roman world. He was eventually named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. With absolute power, he launched a blitz of reforms to fix the very problems that had rotted the Republic for a century. He tackled debt, passed laws to relieve financial burdens, and launched massive public works projects that created jobs. He gave land to his veterans and the urban poor, securing their loyalty for good. He expanded the Senate from 600 to 900, packing it with his supporters and diluting the power of the old aristocrats who despised him. He even granted Roman citizenship to people in the provinces, a move that helped unify the Roman world. His most lasting reform, the calendar. The old Roman calendar was a mess. Caesar, with help from astronomers, created the solar-based Julian calendar. With a few tweaks, it's the same one we use today. To his supporters, he was a populist hero, cleaning up a corrupt, broken system. To his enemies, he was a tyrant. He put his own face on coins, something reserved for gods and long-dead kings. His birthday became a public holiday. He sat on a golden throne in the Senate. The whispers grew louder. Caesar didn't just want to be a dictator, he wanted to be a king. And in Rome, king was the most hated word there was. The senators watched, terrified, as Roman liberty died before their eyes. They decided there was only one way to save it: the Ides of March. The conspiracy took shape in the shadows of the Senate. Around 60 senators, many of whom Caesar had pardoned after the Civil War, joined the plot. They called themselves the Liberators. Their leaders were Cassius, a bitter and pragmatic soldier, and Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar was genuinely fond of, almost like a son. Brutus was a descendant of the man who had overthrown Rome's last king centuries earlier to found the Republic. The conspirators saw themselves as patriots, slaying a tyrant to save Rome's soul. They truly believed that if they just got rid of Caesar, the Republic they loved would magically spring back to life. It was a profound and ultimately fatal miscalculation. The day they chose was the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE. Caesar was warned, or so the legend goes, by a soothsayer to beware the Ides of March. On the day itself, he supposedly saw the seer and joked, "The Ides of March have come," to which the seer replied, "I, Caesar, but not gone." Inside the Senate house, the trap was sprung. The conspirators surrounded him. Suddenly, daggers appeared. They stabbed him again and again in a desperate frenzy. Caesar fought back until he saw Brutus among his attackers. That was the final blow. Ancient sources disagree on what, if anything, he said last. One popular report claims he uttered in Greek, "You too, my child." But others say he simply pulled his toga over his head in resignation and fell, bleeding to death from 23 stab wounds at the base of a statue of his great rival Pompey. Brutus stepped forward, ready to give a grand speech about restoring freedom. He was met with stunned, horrified silence. The other senators fled. The citizens of Rome locked themselves in their homes. The liberators had killed the tyrant, but they hadn't created liberty. They had created a terrifying power vacuum: the accidental empire. Here is the great irony. The men who killed Caesar to save the Republic are the ones who ultimately destroyed it. They had a plan to kill a man, but zero plan for what to do next. They thought the people would celebrate them as heroes. They were dead wrong. The Roman people, who had loved Caesar and his reforms, were furious that a clique of elites had murdered their champion. This public anger was a weapon waiting to be used, and it fell into the hands of a master manipulator, Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal right-hand man. At Caesar's funeral, Antony gave one of the greatest speeches in history. He started by sarcastically praising the assassins as honorable men, then dramatically revealed Caesar's bloody toga, pointing out every single stab wound. He read from Caesar's will, which left his gardens to the public and a sum of money to every citizen in Rome. The crowd, whipped into a frenzy of grief and rage, became a mob, hunting the conspirators and burning down the Senate house. Brutus and Cassius had to run for their lives, but Antony wasn't the only one playing the game. A new player emerged, an 18-year-old nobody took seriously, Caesar's great-nephew, Octavian. Caesar had no legitimate son, so he had secretly adopted the boy in his will, making him his heir. When Octavian, now calling himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, showed up in Rome, everyone underestimated him. It was the biggest mistake of Antony's life. Octavian was patient, cunning, and absolutely ruthless. He knew his greatest asset was his new name, Caesar. A new round of brutal civil wars kicked off. First, Antony and Octavian teamed up to hunt down and defeat Brutus and Cassius. Then, as always happens, the victors turned on each other. The final showdown was between Antony, who had allied himself with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, and Octavian. At the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian's forces crushed their fleet. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt and committed suicide, leaving Octavian the sole undisputed ruler of the entire Roman world. The Republic was dead. All Octavian had to do was make it official. But he'd learned a vital lesson from his great-uncle's murder. Romans might accept a king, but they would never accept the title of king. So he pulled off a political masterstroke. In 27 BCE, he went before the Senate and announced he was restoring the Republic. The grateful senators in turn gave him a new title, Augustus, the revered one. He called himself Princeps, first citizen. It was a brilliant illusion. The Senate still met, but Augustus held all the real power. He commanded the army, controlled the money, and made all the decisions. He had achieved what Caesar couldn't: absolute power dressed up in the robes of the old republic. The assassination meant to stop one-man rule had, after 13 more years of bloodshed, led directly to the coronation of Rome's first emperor. The man who wrote the blueprint. Julius Caesar was a paradox, a populist aristocrat, a reforming conqueror, a man whose ambition both rescued Rome from itself and destroyed its most treasured traditions. His life became a turning point in Western history. He laid the foundation for the Roman Empire, a superpower that would shape Europe for 1,000 years. The system of government he started, which his heir Augustus perfected, became the model for empires to come. Roman law, administration, and engineering, spread by the empire he inadvertently created, are foundational to the modern West. His own name, Caesar, became the very word for emperor, echoing through history as Kaiser in Germany and Tsar in Russia. The untold story here isn't just that Caesar conquered Gaul or won a civil war. It's that his true legacy was an accident, a direct consequence of the very act meant to erase him. The daggers on the Ides of March weren't the end of his story. They were the beginning. They pushed Rome into one last bloody civil war and cleared the stage for the rise of an empire. Julius Caesar did more than change history. He accidentally created the blueprint for power, for ambition, and for building a civilization. He wrote it in his own blood, and its design still casts a long shadow over our world today. If you want to explore more stories of how history really happened, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And let us know in the comments, was Caesar a hero, a villain, or something far more complicated? Thanks for watching.